Good morning. Go ahead, take your Bibles out, turn to the book of Mark. We are going to be in Mark chapter 14, looking in verses 53 to 72. As we continue to walk through the Gospel of Mark, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, we are getting to a close, okay? And so the end is in sight. If you've been around with us since the beginning of Mark, I think people are going to start judging when they started coming to Redemption Hill on where they were in Mark when they started coming, because it's taking years to get through, it seems like. But we're getting to the final few passages of the Gospel of Mark. And as we're looking at the Gospels, we're looking at the Gospel of Mark specifically, and really anytime we're talking or thinking about discipleship. And I think the word discipleship, it's the proper word. It's a word that we use a lot here at Redemption Hill Church and should as followers of Jesus. It's a very biblical word, but I think sometimes it's in one ear and out the other ear. And so when we're thinking about being apprentices of Christ, I'll kind of throw that word out there, that we're talking about talking like Christ, walking like Christ, looking like him, doing the things that he does, presenting ourselves in the way that he presents himself. And we're talking about truly following him, finding our identity and who he is. We're really talking about, that's what we're talking about with discipleship. And when we're trying to do that in life, when we're looking at God's word and we're trying to discover out of God's word the living and active, breathing word of God and how it affects our understanding, our affections, our actions, there's really three components that every single time we open the word of God, we are trying to kind of draw out. We're trying to challenge one another towards. But these are also three components that really determine apprenticeship or discipleship. And so some of us throughout the course of the passage this morning, we might kind of discover in our own hearts and minds that maybe we're only one of these things, or maybe we're practicing two of these things. And I want to challenge us as we look at this text that all three of these components are present in a true follower of Christ. If you're not a follower of Christ this morning, you're just here and you're just trying to kind of seek truth, and maybe somebody invited you to church, we're glad that you're here. These are the three things that God is going to be doing in your heart and mind today as we look at his word, and I believe he draws you unto himself. And my prayer for you is that you would leave this place as a follower of Christ, an apprentice, a disciple. This is what you were created for. It's what you ultimately desire. It's everything that you're seeking. You are in the right place. But if you are a follower of Christ, these are the three things that make up a true believer and apprentice, okay? There is a head component. All right, I'm going to give you three H's. This is the only time I'm going to alliterate in the history of Redemption Hill Church. If you are a longtime person who's grown up in the church and this is how you grew up and the pastor always gave you 3 points and they all start with the same letter, this is it, man. 3 H's, all right? There's a head component. We want to understand in a deeper way who Christ is. We want to understand his word. We want to have knowledge. We want to have a deep understanding of who he is, what he said, who he says he is, what he says he's done. And then the second thing is there's a heart component. What we know begins to transform what we have affection for. And we feel Christ. We know that he is living and active. We understand him in a deep way in the depths of our soul. And as I said, there are certain of us maybe that struggle with kind of feeling all three of these. Maybe there's one that's just predominant in your life, or really the only thing in your life, and you've grown up in church or you've been in church and one thing kind of defines you and you call yourself a follower of Christ. Certainly there are people in the church who have a lot of knowledge, but they don't have affection for Christ. There's no love in their display of what they understand and what they know. There's no feeling towards God and a growth and compassion for others and an understanding of grace and putting forgiveness and love and all of those things that on display that Christ displays to us. And then maybe some of us, we have a really easy time with the emotive part of it, right? We love to come together and to sing the right songs and to pray the right things and kind of say the right things about God's word. And it really we come to church to get our affection stirred. And so we feel God. And then when we leave this place, it's like, man, I need to get back with the people of God. I need to gather back together. And there's a beauty in that. And we should have our affections stirred as we're learning about Christ and we're learning about God and who he is and what he's done. But sometimes we can just have knowledge, and it's just like I have understanding, and I understand theology, or I just want my affections to be stirred. I want emotions to just pour out, and that's when I really feel like I'm close to God, and that's the only time I feel I'm close to God. There's no real change or real transformation that happens in our lives when we leave this place. Monday through Saturday in our everyday lives, there's really no difference between us and anyone else or someone who doesn't call themselves a follower of Christ. And this is where the third component comes into play. It's a hands component. So you have a head component, a heart component, and a hands component. This means that everything that we're learning and knowing and understanding is affecting us at the very being of who we are. And we're believing deeply what we are understanding. And as Matt said in his prayer, stealing a line from my sermon, who we are determines what we do. I love it, and it's fine. I thought to myself, man, I got to come up with another line. Here it is. What we believe deeply, we will live truly. If we understand it, if our heart is stirred for it, then it will begin to affect us. The things that we believe will determine what we do. And if you believe them deeply and truly, then you will act them out in your life. So it's not just a knowledge, it's not just a feeling, a good feeling that we have, but it's a transformation. This is what the gospel is. There's a way that you were created to live. There's a God that you're created to know. There's a heart that you're created to feel. And there's a life that you're created to pursue and to live into through the power of God. And this is what we seek. Who am I? Where do I belong? What am I here to do? And He is the answer. He's the knowledge that you're seeking to understand. He's the affection that you're seeking to feel. He's the activity, the mission that you're pursuing to find and achieve. These three things must be present in the life of the disciple. And as we get into our text this morning, I want us to understand and I want us to investigate our own hearts. Are these things what define me? Are these the pursuits of my life? Are they being displayed where I live and where I work and where I play? And as we get into the text this morning, I just want to pray that these would be the things that God finds, that puts into our hearts, into our minds. God, thank you so much for the opportunity to gather together and to come together as people who love you, people who are seeking truth, people who desire understanding, who want to feel what we were created to feel, and who want to do the things that we were created to do. And God, as we come together and we dive into your word to have understanding of who you are, and our affections are stirred as we worship you together, I pray that we would leave this place and we would live as people who have been transformed by your glory and your good and your grace and your mercy and your forgiveness and your compassion. And God, we would be a people who put that on display, who have a lens for the truth and an understanding for all other knowledge that we may come into contact with of where it is founded and how to make sense of it and how to put it on display. And God, would we be a people of joy, giving you glory in everything that we do? And would we be on mission that others around us that you have put into our lives might know why they are here and who they belong to and what they are created to do? God, thank you for coming. And thank you, as we see in this text, for going on trial on our behalf and dying on the cross to pay the penalty for our rebellion and sin and rising to defeat all that's defeating us, that we might have new life in you. And God, we pray that you would deeply imprint these things in our hearts and minds, that we might live them out with our hands and our feet. In Jesus' name, amen. As I was thinking about this passage this week and this idea of our head, our heart, and our hands, I was one thing that I really like to do when I get a chance to, and when the weather's nice outside, and now that the kids are back in school, my kids are this week. I know some of you still have a week or two left. God bless you, but our summer's over, and so our kids are back in school. So I was able to this week for one day kind of just sit outside in my backyard, and we live on the north side of Winston, and we have really tall trees in our neighborhood, lots of birds and lots of sounds. And on a good day, I can kind of see Pilot Mountain. And I love just sitting out there and just looking at creation. And there's this thing that just kept popping into my head, this reality of this craftsmanship that's in everything. We see it in our own lives, right? There's an artisanship to a lot of what we do. And one of the things that I love to do is go to like artisan markets or farmers markets, even at flea markets in today's world. You can kind of see things that somebody has seen, material that God has created. They've had this idea of imaging him in creation, and they take that material and they put something together, and they care for it and they love it, and they have this value that they've put into it in their lives, and they care how it affects those who take it and those who purchase it and how it brings joy into their life. There's a purpose in which they put it together, and it's a one-of-a-kind thing. And so I love going to those places. I love leather goods and things that women make with their hands, and whether it be wood, furniture, or necklaces, or whatever it may be, because there's a special kind of beauty to it. That some man, some woman took something of the materials of the world. They had this idea to create something. They put it together in love, and they care what it actually does for the one who purchases it. And there's a beauty to it, and it's something that's really magnificent to think about. And certainly all of that is because we're created in the image of God, and God has created all things from nothing that we experience, and everything that we see has a craftsmanship and artisanship to it. It was made by one with a purpose and love and in care and desires joy for the ones that he has created to experience it. And to give glory to him in all things. And when we get into this text, what we begin to see, some of you are like, pull all this together, dude. What we begin to see is that it looks like we're in this dark moment of total chaos. But what I want us to understand is that God is in control of everything. He has created everything. He has created it with a purpose, with a beauty. He's brought it all together for our joy and his glory. And even when we look at this reality of him going on a Jewish trial that will lead him to the cross, and next week we'll look at the Roman trial, and then the cross, all the way to the resurrection and the mission that he sends us on, we go through over the next couple of weeks of some really dark, chaotic looking moments. But I want you to know that he is the craftsman behind the plan for salvation, and everything that takes place, he has put into plan. And he is bringing it all about, and he is in complete control of it all. And we will see that in this text as we read it, the beauty and the magnificence of who he is and what he has done for us. And how this is the only way for our salvation and to be who we were created to be. So without further ado, Mark 14:53, and they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and elders and scribes came together, and Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. Pay attention to how the trial is going. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands." Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he remained silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And the word there is actually the word for God. They often wouldn't say it. In other gospels, the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, we see this story taking place. We'll bring those together as we look at this text. "Are you the Christ, the Son of God?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his garments and said, "What witness do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and cover his face and strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. And then we see another trial taking place. This is really the story of two trials, that of Jesus and that of Peter representing us. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it, and after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke and a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and he wept. When we look at this text, certainly there's some things that we're jumping into. And if you've been around over the last handful of weeks, you know exactly the path that we have taken through the text to get here. But there's a couple of things as we've gone through the book of Mark, as we've seen that Jesus is coming, has come and lived physically the life that we could not live. He has come to live on our behalf, sinless and in giving glory to God in all things where we have rebelled and walked against God. We have sought to build our own kingdoms and to be our own kings and to make our own truths. And Jesus has come to live in the way that we could not, perfectly for us. He has proclaimed who he is and what he has come to do, that he is going to die on the cross for our sin and rebellion and rise from the grave to defeat all that is defeating us so that we might be brought back into relationship with him, that our head, heart, hands might be in harmony as they were created to be. And the reason that all that you know never connects to all that you accomplish and all that you feel and all that you do, and all that you feel never connects to all that you know and all that you accomplish and all that you do, and it never satisfies your soul, no matter how much you serve, no matter how much you love, no matter how much you seek justice, it never satisfies, is because all of those were to be wrapped in one, that is Jesus. And without him at the center, nothing will make sense and nothing will be understood and nothing will come together that we were created to know and to live in. So Jesus comes, he proclaims to be the God who has come to set us free. He proclaims through his miraculous works, putting on display who he is, and he tells the disciples, if you remember the last couple of weeks, we saw Mary come in at a dinner at the beginning of the week of his Passion Week, the week before he goes to the cross. And she surrenders everything to him, giving her his most expensive thing. And he says, this is displaying what it looks like to truly be my disciple, that you lay everything down, understanding that I am everything that you need, that me plus nothing equals everything, and that I am the one that is most valued and worthy. And then we see him tell the disciples at the Last Supper, after he cleanses the temple and says, this is not religious activity, morality. This is not philosophies of life, living good, doing the right things. This is not what gives you salvation. He says that it's all hypocritical, that there's one way for salvation, that it's him and placing our faith in him and what he has come to do. And then at the Last Supper, we celebrated 2 weeks ago, he tells the disciples that he has come to die and he will rise. He lets them know that he will be betrayed and that he is going to go on trial and do only what he can do by dying for us. And then in the garden we saw last week, he begins to pray to God, God, if this cup, the third cup of the communion supper, the cup of affliction, if there's any other way, would you take this from me? But not my will, but your will be done. He gets his answer that he is the only way and he's the only one that can bring salvation as he goes back to the disciples and they're all sleeping after he had asked them to watch and to pray. He is the only one who can save. And at the end of that time in the garden, Judas, whom Jesus had predicted would betray him, comes and he betrays him. And the high priest and the guards come to Jesus. And some commentators say there could have been 100 to 200 men that come to captivate or capture Jesus in the middle of the night. and Judas comes and betrays him. And the other disciples get really confused and they all run away. And in a sense, they're betraying Jesus, though we'll see them come back to him, but they're just confused. It's chaos. Like, this isn't what's supposed to happen. What's going on? How could all of these people come in the middle of the night when we're supposed to be here praying? And they're capturing Jesus and they're taking him to prison. They're putting him on trial. What is happening? And they all just disperse. They're confused. And Peter takes out his sword and kind of, I believe, awkwardly, right? It could have been that the guy just ducked, and Peter was a very skilled swordsman. I believe Peter, in all of his awkwardness and all the things that he says, was just an awkward dude. And he just awkwardly swung the sword and hit the guy's ear rather than his head. But Jesus, even in that moment, puts the man's ear back, the servant of the high priest. And there's just confusion. Peter's like, we gotta step up and rise up and stand up for Jesus. And then all the other disciples are confused and they're running away. And it just looks like all heck is breaking loose. But again, Jesus, God is the craftsman of it all. He's the artisan behind his great plan for salvation. And we see, and I want us to see this as we begin to kind of see what's happening in this text that we just read. Jesus is in complete control of everything. He foretold that Judas would betray him. He's in complete control. As Peter says, we got to stand up, and he takes out his sword. Jesus heals the man that Peter harms and says, Peter, this is not what I need. If this was not my plan, angels could come from heaven and completely destroy all that are against me. This is what I have come to do. As the hundreds of guards and the high priest come and say, are you the one? And John's gospel tells us that Jesus says, I am. And the power of his voice, putting on display who he is, knocks all of them to the ground. And this should have been a clue to them. But then they just get back up going, oh, what was that? That was weird. And then they're all just continuing to come after Jesus, but he's saying, I am God. I am in control. This is the plan. And I hold all the power in this situation, even though you have come to capture me. Jesus shows his control of this situation even in what he says to them in the Gospel of Mark. Look what he says again. Why are you coming to me in the night with all of these men? You're coming in the middle of the night with all of these hundreds of men. He says, I've been teaching in the temple day by day. You could have taken me in front of everyone, and I have done nothing wrong. He's essentially saying, you cowards, I am in control. I hold the power. This is the plan. I have done nothing wrong, and what you are doing is wrong. And so Jesus continues, even in this experience, to put on display that this is his great plan. That he is crafting our salvation in the only way that it could be. He even says back in verse 49 that all of this is taking place for the fulfillment of Scripture. So see, it looks like a dark and chaotic moment to us. When Jesus goes on trial in what we just read, it seems for a moment that he's losing and everyone else is winning. But what we see is this is not a mysterious moment for God. This is not a dark moment. This is not a questionable moment. This isn't a moment where he is confused. This isn't a moment where misplaced power from all the guards is going to seem like it wins or pride is going to overcome him. This is a moment where he is putting on display that though all of us have walked away and followed the course of this world, the prince, the power of the air, all letting our hearts go astray, God comes and because of his great love for us will go on our trial, take our cross, and will rise to defeat sin and death so that we might have life in him. So that we might know him, feel him, live in his power. And so when they take him away, in verse 53, we're told that all of the disciples leave. But here's an important part. Peter, after he flees, when Jesus is arrested, there's something in him. There's a knowledge, there's a feeling, there's something going on between him and Christ. And certainly we've seen Peter and Jesus and his desire to follow Christ. And even when Jesus, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, tells Peter he's going to deny him. And he tells them, and we see Peter remembering it even in the text that we just read, that you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter is adamant. He's like, I will never deny you. Like, I'm going to follow you to the death. And he even kind of displays this at first, but he just has some misunderstanding. Because when the guards come, he wants to defend Jesus. So at first he steps up and he's like, man, sword out, I'm ready. I will never leave you or forsake you. But because Jesus is not who he thought he was. See, in that moment, Peter just thought, man, Jesus is going to rise up. He just said, I am he, and everybody fell down. Like, this is it, man. We are taking over. But then when Jesus surrenders himself, knowing that the only way that he can forgive us of sin is taking our penalty for us after living the life that we could not live, he flees. Jesus is not who I thought he was. Remember that we said in the earlier parts of Mark that this is typically the reason that we deny Jesus, that we do not follow Jesus. It's not some thing that we've thought through or truths that we understand and know. It's typically just that our pride sees Jesus as somebody that we would not have created ourselves. He does things we wouldn't have done. He allows things we wouldn't allow. And to our hearts and minds, that just seems like that can't be. It's incomprehensible. This cannot be God. Yet what we see over and over is he is doing only what God would do to bring what only God can bring. But Peter here leaves him, but then because of his knowledge of him, because of his affection for him, he decides to follow from a distance. And we see Mark clearly kind of points this out, that Peter's following the mob from a distance. And I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I do just want to throw out that as I was thinking through this passage, and as we set up this passage the way that we did at the beginning of our time together, I do just want to throw out, I want us to investigate in our own hearts, because what I see a lot of Christians doing, those who proclaim to follow Jesus with their lives in the church at large, I see a lot of people saying, I follow Jesus, but we're doing it from a distance. We're not close to him. We're not being transformed by him. We're not standing with him on truth and in truth. We're not putting on display who he is. But there's something about it. There's a knowledge that I have, and so I'm connected to him. There's an affection that I feel, so I'm connected to him. So I'm not totally distancing myself in what I would call unbelief, but I'm not following him in a way that affects everything I am and everything that I do with everything that I have, where I live and where I work and where I play. I would say that I'm a Christian, but I'm following from a distance. And I want us just to investigate our own hearts, because as we will see in this text, being a follower of Jesus requires complete surrender. Having everything that you long for, everything that you were created for, it requires complete surrender. There is a cost to it. You gain so much more than you could ever ask or imagine. It is unbelievable what you gain in relationship with Christ and your Creator and who you were created to have community with. But it costs you the idea of just pursuing every fleeting pleasure or having to feel like you have to accomplish something to get what you need or what you deserve or what you long for. To understand that all that I long for, all that I want is in him and him alone. And that allows me to live freely in the world that I live in, to freely try to accomplish what I can accomplish, not needing it, but putting on him on display in everything that I do. It completely frees us to understand who we are in Christ, but it does cost us those immediate desires. Those broken desires to be our own kings and determine our own truths and build our own kingdoms, to surrender to him and his. And when we do this, we find ourselves completely confused and lost, and we might be following from I know that there's a truth, I know that there's something that I feel, but we're losing the joy of actually being close to him. And this is what we see with Peter. It's a lot less like discipleship, and it's a whole lot more like denial, like we see with Peter. And so just ask your heart this morning, your mind this morning, am I following Jesus? Am I doing so from a distance? Because yes, you can understand him and have knowledge of him. Yes, you can be moved for affection for him. But if it is not the deepest belief of our soul, if what we truly believe isn't determining how we truly live our lives, then there's not actually apprenticeship. There's not actually discipleship there. There's just something we're adding to our lives in our pursuit to find our own way. And so this is what we see with Peter. And today a decision has to be made. Will I follow Jesus? Not from a distance. Will I not reject him completely if you're here today and you don't know him? And not from a distance if I have some knowledge and I have some affection. I believe that he's a good add-on to my life. But am I in him? Am I following him? So Jesus is taken away, Peter follows, and this is where it gets really interesting for us. Because everything that we see take place in this text, I need us to know this. I want to throw out, just to lay down a little bit of some historical understanding of what would take place in a Jewish trial so that we can see what Jesus is going through for us. And it doesn't allow us, if we don't, to actually understand at all what is taking place with Peter and how it applies to us. And so what we need to know that as Christ is sinless, he lives a completely sinless life. Everything that is done to condemn him is sinful and wrong. None of this is done in a way that would typically be done. In fact, before Jesus' trial and after Jesus' trial, there is no other trial in Jewish history we can find that took place like the trial of Jesus. It is completely unique, and it completely breaks every law that the Jewish leaders would have followed in every other trial. Jesus is sinless. To condemn him, everything that was done was wrong. The first thing that we see, and we see this in all four of the Gospels, is that Jesus was taken to the high priest's home. We see this right in our text in the Gospel of Mark. Caiaphas was the high priest. He reigned and ruled from 18 AD to 36 AD. His bone box has actually been found. We know a good bit about Caiaphas and his son-in-law, who was the son-in-law, his father-in-law, Annas, which we'll see in the next couple of weeks. So super powerful man in Jerusalem. He is the ruler of the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin had 71 men on it in Jerusalem, and they were the governing body. They followed all the Mosaic laws to the T. 613 laws in the Old Testament. In the Mishnah, the rabbi tradition and the religious leaders' tradition of the Jewish people in the first century, there were 1,500 extra laws, many of which they made sure they were following in the Sanhedrin, and they were the governing body. Every single town would have a governing body. They were a moral people, the Israelite people in the first century. They followed the law. They wanted to make sure everybody else was following the law. They wanted systems in place to make sure they were a moral people. And if law was broken, they wanted leaders that were able to bring people back under the law and convict when necessary. And so in Jerusalem, you had the Sanhedrin. This was kind of the Supreme Court, 71 men, 70 men plus the high priest. In smaller towns, cities, if you had 120 people or more, then you would have a Sanhedrin or a governing body of 23 men. In smaller towns and cities than 120 men, then you could have governing bodies of 3, 5, or 7. Always an odd number, depending on the size, because they needed to be able to vote guilty or innocent. So they were people who really, really lived under the law. This is what we need to know. They took it very, very seriously. You can see how they would conduct themselves in Deuteronomy chapter 16, which we won't read today. But they were a people who absolutely wanted to follow the law to the T. And in this trial, there are, as I said, everything that they do breaks the law, which they had never done before and they had never done after. I just want to give you really quick, I'm just going to read them off. There are more than this, but these are the things we just see right in the Gospel of Mark. 8 laws that they would typically follow. They would have been under oath to follow, but did not follow in Jesus' trial. 8 things. 1, trials before the Sanhedrin were to be held in the Hall of Hewn in the temple. So here we see Jesus is being taken to Caiaphas' house in Jerusalem, his villa, not to the temple. He was not being taken to the right place. Number 2, a trial could never be held on the Sabbath, on a feast day, or the eve of a Sabbath, or the eve of a feast day, which is taking place in Jesus' trial. 3, for every reason to accuse someone of a crime, there had to be equal opportunity given for testimony and witness that could acquit them of the crime they are on trial for. This does not happen in Jesus' trial. If someone was condemned, the Sanhedrin was to sleep on the verdict. They wanted to gravitate towards mercy. And so they would sleep on it. They would not condemn them in the moment and move them on, in this case, to a Roman trial. And this is what they do with Jesus. This keeps them from having a kangaroo court. Number 5, under no circumstances was a trial to be held at night, which is exactly what this trial and when this trial is being held. Number 7, to convict and sentence someone of a crime, there had to be at least 2 witnesses that agree. Obviously, we don't see that in what we just read in Jesus' trial. And finally, if you were accused of blasphemy, which is what Jesus is accused of, you had to directly curse God himself, which Jesus does not do. We see that he actually claims to be God, but he does not curse God, and he is accused of blasphemy. Number 9, I'll give you a free one. If you were accused of blasphemy, then you would actually have the death sentence under Jewish law of stoning. This is not what they do with Jesus, and this is why we study the Roman trial next week. So what we have is a complete witch hunt when it comes to this trial. They have already convicted Jesus. They already are rejecting Jesus. They already know that he has come against everything that they are and all of their power. And he is threatening a spiritual movement that would put him as king and not them as rulers of the people. And so they have already convicted him and made him guilty. And now when we get into the trial, rather than witnesses coming forward that would lead to a trial that agree, they have brought him into trial with a verdict, and they are looking for witnesses. And this is what we see Caiaphas doing. So here they are, verse 55, they're at the high priest's house, and they would probably be on the second floor of the villa. There would be kind of a balcony type of thing that would overlook a courtyard. And the courtyard is where Peter is with all of the other servants and all of the other people that have gathered. And Jesus would be on the second floor on the balcony with the Sanhedrin. And Caiaphas stands there. And in his already stirred up anger, with verdict in mind, he stands and asks for witnesses. He would get even more angry when no witnesses step forward. Mark tells us that nobody had anything to say about Jesus. Caiaphas steps forward and goes, hey, if anybody knows anything Jesus has ever done that he shouldn't have done, that breaks any of the laws, 1,500 in the Mishnah, 613 in the scriptures, if anybody knows anything he's done or anything he said that you could come forward and convict him in any sort of way, then do so now. Silence. Jesus was completely sinless. He lived sinless on our behalf so that he could take the penalty of our brokenness and rebellion. When nobody came forward, and there's good reason that they didn't come forward, because in Jewish law, if you were to bear false witness, and it was discovered that you bore false witness, then you were to be convicted of the same crime that you were bearing witness against, and you would have the same sentence. So everybody knows Jesus has done no wrong. He has said no wrong. He has healed many. He has taught with authority. He has expressed who he is. He has come into the city and proclaimed that it's not about what we do, but what he is going to do for us. He has done nothing wrong. And so Matthew's account tells us that the high priest and those on the Sanhedrin began to bribe people to bear false witness. Hey, free pass. We will not sentence you. We will not condemn you. This is your opportunity. We are going to keep power. We are going to be the ones that people look to. We are going to suppress what is taking place here and get rid of it altogether. Jesus will not be a household name. Jesus will not be known. Jesus will not turn into one that you love. Jesus will not save you. We are going to get rid of him now. This is your opportunity to say what you need to say to get on the good side of those who will rule over you when Jesus is gone. And so many people start stepping forward and bearing false witness. But Mark says none of their stories match. Then Mark gives us in verse 58 the most compelling witness that was given, but it doesn't match either. And apparently some got together and gave some variation of a story that Jesus said the temple would be torn down and rebuilt in 3 days. And they're completely twisting his words. Jesus did say this, but he meant that his body would be killed and taken, and that he would rise 3 days later, and that he would be the temple, that he would be the presence of God, that he would be our forgiveness, that he would be our love, that he would be our communion with God, that he would be our Savior, that he would be our King, that he would set us free, that he would be the one that we need. This is what Jesus meant. And we don't have time to get into it this morning, but it does go to show us that many times we can use the exact words that people say and we can still slander them. See, they didn't take the heart of what Jesus was saying. They twisted his words, but their stories don't match. And so Caiaphas, the high priest, is getting really frustrated. And so he just stands up. We need to know this. He bypasses the witnesses. You need 2 witnesses to agree. We're not getting them. I'm just going to go straight to Jesus. Verse 60, do you have anything to say about these charges at all? And Jesus is silent. What charges? No charge has been made against me. Nothing has collaborated together to say that I've done anything wrong. But I think that Jesus is doing this for 2 reasons. One, anything he says in this moment is going to be twisted and used against him. And 2, I believe that he's fulfilling the prophecy in Isaiah 53 that says, like a lamb led to the slaughter is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Listen, he may not have done any of the things that he is being accused of, but we have. And he is silent on our behalf. He is on our trial for us. And if we were standing there, there could be many who would stand and say, he has done this, she has done that, and it would all be true, and we would have to answer for it. But Jesus has done nothing, and he does not answer for the sins that he has been accused of that he has not committed. He is silent for us. And this, of course, angers Caiaphas, and he gets really, really frustrated that Jesus isn't saying anything, so he goes straight to try to trap him. He leads the witness, and he says, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Are you the Son of God? Like, he just goes straight to it, right? And he tries to mislead the witness. And by the way, anything that I say, anything about lawyering, I have no idea about. If you're a lawyer in this place, like I've been watching Suits on Netflix. That's about the extent of the words that I can give to you. And so hopefully I know what I'm talking about a little bit. But here's what Caiaphas does. He just stands up and says, literally, are you the Christ, the Son of God? And here we go. See, Jesus has remained silent all throughout the Gospel of Mark. There's been hints, and we've been able to see it. As we look at it from history, we see the very first verse of the book of Mark that this is the Christ, this is the Messiah who has come to do and live for us and die for us and rise for us. But all throughout the gospel, the disciples and the followers, they're just getting little hints and they're still confused. But right here, Jesus speaks. He answers the question directly. Look what he says, I am. I am. And by using those words, he ties himself to the God who brought his people out of Egypt and out of oppression, who appeared to Moses in the burning bush saying, I am God. I am the creator, the sustainer. I'm the beginning. I am the end. I'm the Alpha, the Omega. I am everything. I am the God of your people and all of creation who will be forevermore. Jesus puts himself with that moment. And so Caiaphas is burning, but that's not all Jesus says. Look what else he says. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, quoting Psalm 110. and coming on the clouds of heaven, Daniel chapter 7, speaking of the final judgment. And this just absolutely blows the mind of the Sanhedrin. Caiaphas tears his clothes in rage because here's what Jesus is saying. It's absolutely amazing. I am God, and this is not the last trial that you and I will be a part of. You may think you hold the power. You may be able to bribe the witnesses. You may be able to put me into a place where it will lead to death. And you may think that you are in control. But I have the plan. I am the craftsman. I'm the artisan. I am bringing salvation. And one day I will return and I will be the judge over all things from beginning to end. And I will make all things new for all those who place their faith in me. This is not the last trial. I am in complete control. That's what he says to the Sanhedrin. And so Caiaphas tears his clothes. And listen to me, today in this life, you can put God on trial. You can walk him before you and you can pretend to have gavel in hand and you can sit on the imaginary judgment seat and you can say to God, I've read the book, I've read your word, it seems antiquated, it seems like it suppresses me, it seems like it doesn't allow me to be the true me, it seems like you're saying things are true that aren't true, it seems like you talk a lot about judgment and hell, it's not really how I would do things, and you can throw the gavel down and say you're not worth following. But listen to me, that is not the final trial. Jesus will return. What he does here is not out of weakness, it's out of power. And he's not doing it, he's not allowing his pride to swell up. He knows he's in control. He knows he is over all things. He has created it all. He sustains it all. He will be in control for all of eternity. He is doing it for you. He's doing it to pay the penalty of our sin. So listen, you can live the way that you want to now, but in the end, he reigns and rules. And everyone from everywhere that believed anything will realize that he was the only one worthy of honor and glory. He is king. So Caiaphas tears his clothes. I know I need to get to this really quickly. He says, did you hear that? Blasphemy. Which wasn't blasphemy. Again, in the Jewish law, he just accused them of it. What he's ultimately accused them of is he just said he was God. I want to reign and rule. So blasphemy, did everybody hear it? What is your conviction? And everybody wants to convict him. Everyone wants to put him to death. And so they begin to mock him. They begin to spit on him. They begin to hit him. They cover his eyes, and then another would hit him, and then they would ask him to prophesy. Who hit you? See, they're mocking Jesus. They're spitting on him. Imagine yourself in that situation and not knowing who's hitting you, and all you're trying to do is just kind of stay standing because you know if you fall down, you're probably going to be kicked and trampled upon, but your beard is being pulled and your head is being hit and your stomach is being hit and people are mocking you and spitting on you. And yet to fulfill Isaiah 50 verse 6, Jesus says, I gave my back to those who strike and my cheek to those who pull out my beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. All for us. There's one thing that I want to see us to see from Peter. Because meanwhile, while all of this is happening, the guards take Jesus away. And while all of this is happening, Peter is down in the courtyard. He's watching from a distance. And this little servant girl of the high priest, I love this, the most powerful people in all the land are accusing Jesus of something that he did not do. The weakest people in all of the land are accusing Peter of something that he did do. And while Jesus is taking our sin and our verdict, Peter is denying that he is even sinful. This is exactly what we do. But the servant girl comes up to him and she says, aren't you one of the followers of Jesus? And he denies it and a rooster crows. Now that should have awakened Peter. Oh yeah, I remember what Jesus said. But it doesn't. He walks away from this young girl in the fire, but apparently she follows him. And a little bit later, she accuses him again. You're a Galilean. You must be one of them. And then everybody kind of jumps on board. He goes, yeah, you're one of the followers of Jesus. And then Peter gets flustered and he begins to curse and swear against God. Here's this crazy thing that's happening. Peter is being blasphemous against God while Jesus is being put on trial for blasphemy. He is being convicted of what Peter is doing while Peter gets to walk free. Is this not a picture of the gospel? That though we were in sin and we were far from God and we walked away from him and we denied him and we refused him and we do not worship him, here comes Jesus and he was perfect in every way and did not sin, but he is accused of our sin for us. This is exactly what is taking place. Peter is representing our trial. That we get to walk free in Christ by his grace through faith because Jesus took our sin, our verdict. And so as he blasphemes against God, the rooster crows a second time, and Peter remembered. And it says he felt guilt and he felt shame and he began to weep. Here's how I want to end our time together this morning. I wonder if any of us, we're processing all of this and everything that Jesus has done for us, and we're thinking to ourselves, I don't know, I feel some guilt and shame. I'm one of the people who really dig into understanding, but I'm not really sure that my affection's there. Like doing this during worship, I just can't get there, and I can't, I have understanding, but I don't want my affections to be stirred. It feels weak. And you're following from a distance, and maybe there's some guilt and some shame that comes along with that. Or maybe there's something that you've done in your past where you feel guilty and you feel shameful, and Jesus would never forgive me, and God would never love me. And whatever it is, whether you're a follower of Jesus and you're just not close with him, or you have rejected him and done things against him that you would think to yourself, there could never be an overcoming of that. There could never be a forgiveness. There could never be a love. There could never be a grace. There could never be a compassion. He would never forgive me. And I'm overwhelmed with guilt and shame because I don't follow him well, or I don't follow him at all. And I'm seeking my own way. And I know to some extent, every single one of us feels that. To some extent. And there are two different responses that we can have this morning. One is just to feel remorse. I feel guilty. I feel shameful. This is exactly what Judas did. Judas betrayed Jesus just like Peter does and all the disciples did by fleeing from him. But Judas tries to handle it himself. He feels the guilt. He feels the remorse, and he ends up taking his own life. He can't handle it. There's nothing we can do to overcome our sin. Nothing. No matter how good you are or what you try to do to ignore God altogether, you cannot do it, and anything that you do will lead to your death. The death of your joy, the death of your happiness, the death of your satisfaction, the death of everything that you're created to experience in God. If you just feel guilt and shame and remorse, it will never lead to forgiveness. Or we can do what Peter has done. We don't get the rest of the story here. We just see that he wept and he went away. But in the rest of the gospel, we see that Peter did not just feel remorse, he repented. He experienced who Jesus was, and he turned from his sin, and he placed his faith in Christ and what he had done for him. And he places his life and surrenders it all. In Luke 22:61, Luke adds this detail, that as Peter denied him the third time and the rooster crowed, Jesus and Peter make eye contact. Man, I love that. You know that if you're close to anyone in your life, that you can make eye contact with them, and you can say 1,000 words, right? Like you can express emotion, like you can express truths, you can express anger. Jesus makes eye contact with Peter in his darkest, most shameful moment. And what Jesus said with his eyes was not condemnation. What Peter saw was forgiveness. What Peter saw was love and compassion. What Peter saw Jesus say with his eyes was, what I am doing, I'm doing for you. And there was an invitation in that eye contact for repentance. And so when Peter weeps and he goes away in Mark chapter 16, when Jesus rises from the dead, defeating sin and death, and the women come to the tomb and see that it is empty, the angel of the Lord comes to the women and says, go and tell the disciples, and I love this, and Peter. Like Peter's a disciple, but Jesus knows that Peter has done something so shameful. He can't forgive himself. He can't overcome it. And so I'm going to single him out because I love him and I forgive him and I died for him. And if he repents and places his faith in me, then by my grace, through my work, he can be close with me. He doesn't have to follow from a distance. John tells us at the end of his gospel that Jesus goes to where the disciples are fishing after his resurrection, and the disciples see him on the shore, and they begin to row back, and Peter can't wait. And so Peter jumps into the water and begins to swim back to the shore. And I see Jesus there. It's not in the text, but I just see Jesus open arms, waiting for Peter, smile on his face as Peter is doing something completely silly. He's not running from him in this time of darkness and chaos and confusion, but he's running to him, willing to do anything in life, even if it looks ridiculous, to be close to Jesus because he wants to be with his Savior and he wants to live in the truth. There's a belief that has transformed all of his life. And so he swims up to Jesus, and Jesus, I believe, embraces him and asks him 3 times, do you love me? And Peter says, you know that I love you. And then he says, bear witness to me. You just rejected me when you could have bore witness, and now I am saying, as you have turned to me, as you have repented, as I saved you by grace, as I have done all of the work, you can be transformed, you can understand, your heart can be affected, your life can be changed, and you can begin to bear witness. History tells us that's exactly what happens. Clement and Tertullian, church fathers, tell us that Peter lived his life for Christ, bore witness to all that he had done, and then he hung on a cross upside down for his belief that Jesus was God and had risen from the dead because he did not want to die the same way his Savior did. How did he do that? And how did he do it with joy? And how did he do it with all of his life? And here's how he did it. He saw Jesus rise from the dead. And if Jesus rose from the dead and saves our souls and forgives us of our guilt and our shame, then he can provide all things for us. He's worthy of all of life. You guys familiar with the weather vane? In our country, most often there's a rooster on top of a tall building. Very often it's churches, and then there's an arrow there, and it tells us which way the wind is blowing. The truth of the wind. It's been around for a very long time, even before Jesus and the Greeks used them. But for the first several hundred years, up until, and even you'll see them today, for the first several hundred years after Christ and in the early church, they began to discover, they began to build churches in the 4th, 5th century. They were the tallest buildings in the towns and in the cities, and so on top of it, they would put a weather vane, and the reason that they use a rooster dates back to Peter. They want you to be able to look up, and the idea was that you would look up and you would see the truth of the wind, and you would be reminded to ask your own heart and mind, am I living my life in the direction of the truth? Am I living to bear witness to Christ? Am I living for what is real? And if you're a follower of Jesus this morning, we need to ask ourselves that question. If you are not a follower of Jesus this morning, then we need to understand that when we look to the cross and we open up his word and hear from his truth, it is in effect God making eye contact with you, and you have the opportunity to respond.